think Whole30 creates an enormous level of self-awareness and a real sense of connection and trust with your body that has historically perhaps been missing as a result of weight loss dieting. When you weight loss diet, your body sends you signals like, hey, I'm hungry, and you say, no, you're not, because we are dieting. We're not supposed to eat right now. We don't have enough points.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Eliza Barbanel. Melissa Urban is the co-founder and CEO of Whole30, a mega-popular 30-day elimination diet program. She's a 6-time New York Times best-selling author and just released a new book, The New Whole30. We had Melissa onto the show to reflect on the Whole30 universe and how it's evolved alongside food culture over the past 15 years. Melissa Urban, this is Taste. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Happy Pub Day, by the way.
Thank you. It's so exciting. It's finally here.
Yeah, we walked into the studio this morning and that big cover was just right in front, which is such a fun, podcast New York moment.
It really was. I walked in with my editor yesterday because I came in to sign some books, and I kind of didn't even notice it because we were chatting, and she's like, look. And I looked, and there's this huge just display of the book, and I definitely had a moment just seeing it there.
So I'm curious, this is obviously not your first pub day. Do you have any rituals or ways that you're going to celebrate it?
You know, I always start the day with a movement session, even if it means I have to get up super duper early. It's good for my mental health to move my body and to sort of process out any stress excitement that I might be feeling. But then it's really just all about celebration. Today I'm going to be traveling. I'll be on an airplane, but when I land, I'm going to go try to find my local indie bookstore in Toledo and see if I can stealth sign a copy and just see it in the wild. That's always really exciting. And then probably take myself out for a nice dinner tonight.
Oh, I love all of that.
Yeah.
It must be really fun to go into a bookstore and just kind of step back and see if anyone is picking up the book or interacting with it.
I'm always looking for that. I call them sightings in the wild. Occasionally I'll get on an airplane and someone is reading one of my books, or someone in front of me in line at a restaurant, ordering food will be saying oh, I'm doing the Whole30. And I always just really silently kind of scream about that.
Yeah, you don't interact with them when you see that?
Sometimes I do. Once I was at a restaurant and I was placing my order and the person behind me said, "Are you doing Whole30?" And I said, "Actually, I am. You've heard of it?" And she said, "Yes, I've done it. I loved it." She had no idea who I was. And eventually in the conversation, I said, "Well, I'm Melissa Urban. That's my program." And she got so excited. So sometimes I will, but sometimes I just let it exist and have joy with it.
I love that story. Was there something about your order that kind of tipped her off on being Whole30?
I think I'm so practiced when I order and if I'm doing a Whole30. So I was at this Mexican fast casual place and it was I'd like a salad, no rice, no beans, no tortilla. Could I get double guac? Could I get double salsa? I'd like double grilled chicken. And I think it was just the specificity of the order that alerted her.
Yeah, I would imagine you're a pro at doing the order that's exactly what you want. Do you ever have advice for people that are nervous about being particular with a server?
I would always research the menu ahead of time and ask questions ahead of time. So calling a restaurant around 2 or so during their sort of less busy time and saying, I'm doing the Whole30 or I have some dietary restrictions. Can I ask them questions about A, B, and C so you feel confident ordering? And then order without fanfare. I would not go to a restaurant that says no substitutions, please. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're being sensitive there. And then I just tip a little bit extra if the server is willing to accommodate.
Yeah, those are good tips all the way down.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Whole30, and I would imagine that people that are listening to this podcast have heard about this. Maybe they've done it or they have someone in their life that have. But under the impression that maybe someone doesn't know what Whole30 is, could you give a very brief rundown?
Yeah, happy to share. So Whole30 is an elimination and reintroduction program designed to help identify hidden food sensitivities, create new healthy habits around stress management and navigating discomfort and negative emotion, and restoring a healthy relationship with food and your body. So we're not a weight loss plan, we're not a detox, we're not a cleanse. It really is a true reset for your health habits and relationship with food.
And Whole30, I think the 30 implies that you're doing it for a month and then you start to reintroduce these foods after. Is that correct?
Yes. So for 30 days, you'll eliminate foods that are commonly problematic to varying degrees across a broad range of people. Not to say that these foods are bad or unhealthy. There are no good or bad foods. There's no morality when it comes to food. There are no universally healthy or unhealthy foods, right? Any dietitian will say, there's no one size fits all. You have to figure out what works for you. Whole30 is how you figure that out. So you eliminate for 30 days. At the end of those 30 days, you reintroduce those food groups one at a time, very carefully and systematically, and you compare your experience.
And just to take a bigger step back, how did you kind of come to create Whole30 in the first place? We're talking about it being personal, so I would imagine that it was kind of personal to you and what you were looking for.
It was. Whole30 started in 2009, April 2009, as a two-person self-experiment. So we had gone to some nutrition seminars and done some research into potentially inflammatory properties in certain foods. And these were foods that you may be eating because you considered them healthy, but for some people, you can be sensitive to the proteins in these foods or maybe in lactose, the sugar component of dairy. And if you're sensitive to them, then they're going to bring on negative symptoms for you. So we decided to do this 30-day experiment where we eliminated all of those foods like really strictly and then reintroduced them and compared the experience. And I was really into my athletic performance at the time, hoping I'd see a benefit to my CrossFit workouts. But the next 30 days were so profoundly transformatory for me. They were, my energy, my sleep, my mood, my focus. People were noticing that I was just so much happier and seemed so much more active. It was the first time in my life I was able to get off the scale and out of the mirror, which felt so powerful for me. And it really promoted this long-standing, profoundly, transformative change. So I wrote about it on my little CrossFit training blog, and I said, would anyone want to try this? And maybe 100 people said that they would, and that was the start of the first Whole30 as we know it.
Wow. And so we're talking about maybe avoiding some food groups, and I just want to throw out some of the names just so everyone understands. So dairy, for example, alcohol, sugar.
Yes, on the Whole30, you will be eliminating added sugar in all forms, alcohol, grains in all forms, so gluten-containing grains and non-gluten grains, most forms of legumes, so beans, peanuts, and soy, and also most forms of dairy for 30 days. Those are the food groups we eliminate. And again, there are plenty of health-promoting properties to those food groups, and you may discover upon reintroduction that they work great for you. And if that's the case, absolutely keep eating them. But this experiment helps you identify the foods that work best in your unique system and lets you feel exactly as good as you want to feel while continuing to eat the foods you love.
And then when it comes to reintroducing the foods, do you have for 3 days you eat dairy again and then you stop? Or how do you kind of do that in the most thoughtful way?
Yes, we have a very clear reintroduction schedule because you want to treat reintroduction almost like a scientific experiment. You've eliminated these foods for 30 days. You have this new baseline now for how you feel in the absence of these foods. So we want you to bring back one food group at a time and eat only that food group in the context of otherwise Whole30 meals, kind of like the experimental factor.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll go back to the Whole30 elimination phase for 2 to 3 days in between so that if you do have any negative symptoms, you allow those to kind of dissipate or die down before you bring the next food group in. So it's very precise, but you're able to learn so much in just a matter of 10 days during reintroduction about how these food groups impact so many of your body systems.
Yeah, I think to me that's the most interesting part of Whole30 is this kind of scientific element. And I imagine it also just kind of trains you to be more in touch with your body and think about am I tired because of this thing that I've been eating? Or has my work week been very stressful? Or am I menstruating? I feel like there are so many different factors that can come into play as well.
There are. I think Whole30 creates an enormous level of self-awareness and a real sense of connection and trust with your body that has historically perhaps been missing as a result of weight loss dieting. When you weight loss diet, your body sends you signals like, hey, I'm hungry. And you say, no, you're not, because we are dieting. We're not supposed to eat right now. We don't have enough points. And so on the Whole30, people really get back in touch with those natural regulatory mechanisms. And because we don't limit calories, count calories, calorie restrict, limit portions or meal timing, you eat when you're hungry. You stop when you're full. If you need a snack, you have a snack. And I think that sense of trust really helps to empower people to realize that at the end of their Whole30, I am empowered to make the choices that are right for me. So it doesn't matter what this influencer says about food or what Time magazine says about this food. I know how this food works in my body, and I trust myself to make the choices that are right for me in that moment.
Yeah, I think that choice part is really interesting. When I was doing research for our talk, I was kind of going through the Whole30 subreddit, which I'm sure you spend a lot of time on. And it was really fascinating. A couple of people were like, I wish I didn't have this knowledge about myself because I love eating this thing so much, but it's so clear to me now that it's not good for my body. Do you ever hear that feedback from people?
I do. Can I swear on this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I always joked that our tagline should be awareness is a bitch.
Yeah.
Because During my first Whole30, I discovered that dairy at that time was not my friend. And I loved cottage cheese. I loved Greek yogurt. I loved goat cheese. But when I reintroduced those things, I felt like I had an alien in my belly. And I realized that all of the diarrhea I had experienced and bloating I had experienced wasn't normal. And I didn't have to live with that if I just avoided dairy. But there is a grieving process, I think, where you think to yourself, I wish I didn't realize that my Diet Coke tasted like chemicals, or I wish I didn't think, that this food was now too sweet. But then I enjoy feeling as good as I feel so much that I don't feel deprived when I leave that out of my diet.
Sometimes people that have sensitivities to foods here in the United States, when they travel and go to other countries, they don't have that same sensitivity, which I imagine might be interesting in the Whole30 context as well.
It's very interesting, and I've noticed that myself. When I eat gluten here, I get a little bloated and my face breaks out. Not a big deal, so I enjoy it when it's worth it. But when I was in Europe, I was able to eat quite a bit of gluten, and I felt great. But, is it the soil that it's grown in? Is it the strain of wheat that's grown? Or is it the fact that I was on vacation, and I was walking, and I was sleeping more, and I was less stressed, and I was getting lots of sunshine? So I think there are a lot of factors at play. As you mentioned earlier, it's not just food, but it is interesting to see how your body responds to these foods in different contexts as well.
Yeah, you're right. I think it is kind of fun to get to say, oh, the bread in Europe just makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Because you got to be in Europe and eating that bread in the first place, and
That's
you're
right.
feeling good about that. So we're here to talk about the new Whole30 book, which is actually the title of the book as well. And this is the 8th book that you've done. I'm so curious, what does this one add to the canon, and how did you go about developing it?
Yes. So the flagship book called The Whole30, I wrote in 2014 and it came out in 2015. And that was the manual for how to do the Whole30. It was how to do the program, an extensive FAQ, all of these resources like a shopping list and recipes. And that book has been profoundly, I think, helpful for so many people, millions of people. But it's 9 years old. And so over the course of the last 9 years, we've got a lot more science to talk about how foods interact with our body to give us a better foundation for the Whole30 program rules. The food landscape has changed tremendously. In 2015, cauliflower did not know that it could be pretzels and pizza crust and all of these tortilla chips. So the food landscape has changed, and we have a lot more gluten-free, dairy-free foods on the market. I've gone through a big evolution. I became a mom. I went through a very public divorce and business split. I got a concussion and had to deal with the chronic injury as a result of my concussion. There's been a lot of change and evolution in myself. And so I knew that book needed an update. It needed a refresh. But when I went to take a look at it, I realized it didn't need an update. I needed to write it all over again. I needed to start from the scratch, from my new, more understanding, empathetic, kind of self-graceful perspective. I have come to acknowledge so much more about my own privilege, and that needed to be in the book too, about how my lived experience is vastly easier than other people's just because of the way I was born. I addressed that in the book. We created a new plant-based Whole30 program in 2022 for people who wanted to do the program without any animal products, and so that needed to be in the book. So this really does replace the original flagship book, but it was a complete rewrite from what feels like a very new Melissa, like a different lifetime Melissa.
It must be really special to get to kind of realize that you're going to start from scratch again and then think about what is foundational to you and this thing that's really important in your life and in your journey.
It was. It was so much harder than I thought it would be, though. For that very reason, I started by looking at the original book, and I thought, okay, I'll take this chapter and I'll update it. And I'll take this chapter and update it. And I quickly realized that wasn't going to cut it. That wasn't what I needed. And I had to put the old book aside and stare at a blank Microsoft Word document and think, how would I want to talk about the Whole30 today and lead and guide people through it? So it was incredibly cathartic for me personally. I think it was really, I think I was so inspired and I was very passionate about it, but it was hard. It was really hard to start from scratch and think about what are the most important things I want to say, because the book can't be 4,000 pages.
Right. And the blank Word doc is truly the most stressful place to start from.
It really is.
But I think for myself as a writer, whenever I review my old writing, the only way I want to feel is oh, I don't love this anymore, because that means that I'm growing and that there's something new to say. I think when you revisit something from a long time ago and you wouldn't change anything, like maybe you need to look at it again.
That is such an excellent point. The information in the Whole30, 2015's edition, it holds up. It is a good guide to the program, and there's a lot of good information in there. However, I went back and looked at some of the things I read, some of the tough love language, some of the unintentionally, I'd say judgmental language, right? Saying things like make good food choices or calling certain foods junk foods. And I looked at that and I thought, I wouldn't say it like that today.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand why I said it like that then. That was what I believed. That was who I was. That was how I talked to myself. That was my understanding of the world and privilege and diet culture. But, I looked at it, and even in the new Whole30, I literally wrote, I don't love how I said it back then. And I'm so glad that I have the chance to do it over. And here's how I would say it today.
Definitely. And I think it's where diet culture was in a different place back then. And as you alluded to with the cauliflower renaissance, I think our way of eating in general was super different back then. And I'm curious, like Whole30 has become such a big movement. There's all these other ways of eating like keto and paleo that have become more popular. And now when you go to Whole Foods, you can buy kind of like grain alternatives or things like that. Like, how do you think the food landscape has changed since Whole30 was introduced? And do you think it makes it easier to do the program?
The food landscape has changed tremendously. And I would like to say that Whole30 has had a pretty big influence on that, to be honest. We have more than 130 Whole30 approved partners who make products specifically to fit our program rules. And we've had entire brands reformulate their whole line to remove the added sugar to become Whole30 approved, which is remarkable. I think that because there is more awareness around food sensitivities and because people are more understanding of various dietary values, this new entire market has popped up to accommodate people who choose to eat gluten-free or dairy-free or vegan. There is a certain health halo around some of those labels where people automatically assume that if it's vegan or gluten-free, it's health promoting or it's very nutritious. So we work really hard to teach people how to read labels and make those decisions for themselves. But I do think it makes doing the Whole30 easier than it's ever been. In 2015, we were hand making our own mayo and making our own ranch dressing and making our own bone broth. And there wasn't a Whole30 bowl available at Chipotle. And so now there are far more convenience products. There are far more, there's a lot more accessibility if you're going out to eat with restaurants and even Whole30 approved menus at places like Chipotle. And I do think it makes the program more accessible for people. We also have created a lot of resources, though, for people who want to do budget-friendly versions. So for every convenience item that is more expensive, we've got recipes and DIY solutions on the website and in the book so that we can span like the full breadth of resources.
Mm-hmm. And when there's something like a new convenience item, which is, I'm assuming you're referring to like a packaged good or something like that, do they come to you and your team and say, hey, we want to release this product? Do you get to taste it, or is there like any interplay between the two?
Yeah, there's always. So if a brand has a new product, say Primal Kitchen, they're one of our Whole30 approved partners. And if they want to come out with a new dressing or a sauce, they send it to us ahead of time. We read the label ahead of time. We officially certify that it is Whole30 approved and that it meets the program rules. Sometimes we get to be involved in recipe testing ahead of time. So they'll send it to us and say, what do you think about this flavor? What does it need? Sometimes we're involved in recipe formulation. We'll get a brand that says, we want to remove some of these additives or fillers from our product. Could we use this? Do you have experience using like a tapioca starch instead? And we'll get to have that interplay. So we do work very closely with our brands and really love working with them to formulate products that, of course, taste amazing, but also support people's Whole30.
Yeah, it must be really fun to get to try things, especially as they're being developed and be in that interplay. And while we're talking about recipes, I want to talk to you about the recipes in the new book. Are there any that you are especially like proud of or into right now?
Oh, there are so many. There are really, really good recipes. And I've been cooking a lot more plant-based at home. I do eat animal products, but I've been cooking more plant-based because the recipes in the new book are good. There's an original recipe in the Whole30 book called Melissa's Chicken Hash that I developed with a chef friend of mine because I was so sick of eggs for breakfast and I wanted something that was egg-free. So it's chicken thigh and apple and sweet potato and apple cider vinegar and walnuts, toasty walnuts, and it's so delicious. And we revamped it for the new Whole30 to include like a coconut yogurt sauce with it that is out of this world. So that's one of my favorites. There's also a Thai-inspired larb soup in the new Whole30 book that is so delicious for lunch. It's rich, it's hearty, the flavors are incredible. I absolutely love it. The macrobiotic bowl on the cover of the new book is probably my favorite plant-based recipe. There's a ginger turmeric dressing with that should just be put on everything. It's like hands down my favorite. And there's a Korean-inspired noodle bowl on the plant-based side that's actually a breakfast bowl. So again, we really want to mix up your idea of what traditional breakfast food is, but it uses butternut squash noodles and extra firm tofu, and it's just so hearty and comforting.
When you said noodle bowl, my ears perked up because I was like, what kind of noodle is
I
this going to be?
know.
Well, is a butternut squash noodle something you make with a spiralizer, or can you buy it somewhere?
You can buy them convenience. So most grocery stores will now have spiralized or pre-cut butternut squash, maybe sweet potato, definitely zucchini noodles, sometimes cucumber noodles. But they're so easy to make yourself with an at-home spiralizer. You can just get one that, you kind of twirl it and it turns it into a noodle shape. It's really fun for the kids and it makes it very cost-effective.
Yeah, the noodles, I think, is one big development in the grocery store. Also, coconut yogurt that you mentioned. I feel like that must be really huge for the Whole30 program.
It is. We've got coconut and almond milk yogurts now that are unsweetened. Kite Hill is one of our Whole30 approved partners, and they make a variety of cream cheeses, nut-based cream cheeses that are game-changing. They are so delicious. They also have a nut-based ricotta. So all of these kind of dairy-free products, too, they add a lot of creaminess and texture and flavor to your meals. And if you're really missing cheese or you discover you can't do the lactose or the casein or whey component of cheese when you reintroduce, they provide a delicious alternative.
Yeah, I would imagine that some of the feedback you hear is people who miss cheese. I feel like that's such a beloved food group. And I know that through your newsletter and podcasts and social media, you're really connected to this Whole30 community, even what you're saying about bumping into people in the grocery store and the restaurants. I'm curious about if there are any meaningful stories or feedback that you've heard from people over the years, since there is so much history in this community.
Oh, so many stories. I was doing an event in Atlanta at a Costco store because we have this Whole30 marinated chicken in Costco now in the Southeast region. And a woman and her daughter came up, and the daughter is 14, and they're doing the Whole30 together. And the daughter said, my anxiety at school is so much better since I've started Whole30. I'm crying in this Costco, listening to this daughter say that her anxiety at school was so bad and she really struggled with social connection and even her homework and getting her work done. And since she started the Whole30, her anxiety is so much more improved and she feels so much more relaxed. And her mom is she's like a new person having started this program. So, I'm weeping in the grocery store. We've had incredible stories from people who have reversed type 2 diabetes. Or I remember this story about Jerry. She was in her 70s. And she had a cat that she loved taking for walks in a stroller. This cat would go in a stroller and Jerry would go on walks. But she had so much knee pain and joint pain and swelling that she hadn't been able to walk her cat. And at the end of her 30 days, she sent me a picture of her out in her stroller walking her cat. She had regained all of that mobility and energy. And it can provide such a radical, life-changing transformation, and that carries over into every area of your life.
Yeah, and then you get to receive cat photos, which is a blessing.
Oh, Jerry, I loved it. Yes, I love hearing from people like that.
Yeah, I'm sure you also hear or see online a lot of misconceptions of people who think that they're doing something wrong way or they have a problem with something. Is there any Whole30 misconception that you would want to clear up?
I think the most prevalent is that Whole30 is a weight loss diet. And I get it. I get why the media, mainstream media, especially U.S. News and World Report, for example, they come out with their best weight loss diets every January. And Whole30 is always on the list, and it has historically been at the very bottom. And I don't know whether I should be proud because we're the worst weight loss diet because we're not a weight loss diet, or frustrated because they keep including us. But we're not a weight loss diet, but weight loss is still a huge industry, and it definitely is still a buzzword for consumers. Consumers want weight loss. And so when media doesn't really know how to classify us, they kind of stick us into that weight loss diet. But then people assume that Whole30 is prescriptive. They're like, oh, Whole30 says these foods are bad and you should never eat them again. And that's simply not the case. So I think that's a big misconception. I hear a lot of people say it's not sustainable. And I'm like, well, it's a short-term elimination program. It's not meant to be sustainable. And after your Whole30, you take your learnings and you apply them however you want in your food freedom. I am not here to tell you how to eat in life after your Whole30. And I'm not even here to say, hey, that ice cream made you break out and made your stomach hurt. You should never eat ice cream again. If ice cream is worth it for you and you love it so much and it is worth whatever consequences, I want you to enjoy it and savor it and just time it such that it's not taking you out, on your wedding day or during your vacation. So I think those are two of the big ones that I always try to sort of gently counteract in interviews.
Yeah. And you mentioned January, which is obviously such a big time for people to do any kind of lifestyle change. And I feel like recently I've been reading online people talking about, especially if you live in a cold place, like January is a time for rest and kind of like being easy on yourself. And that if you're trying to make a big change, like it might not actually be the best time of year to do that, which I find really interesting. Do you feel like there is like a right time or a wrong time to do Whole30?
I would say there is a wrong time to do it in that because it's an elimination program and because there are rules to follow, and in order to be effective, you really do need to completely eliminate those foods and then be very careful with reintroduction. If Whole30 is going to add more stress than the benefits it gives you in terms of your energy and sleep, that's probably not a good time to do Whole30. And I would probably wait until you were out of that like very difficult season. But, January is always going to be a big month, the new year, new you. But we find September is almost as big as January for Whole30. I think people are getting out of, summer has been chaotic. Kids are not in school. You're on vacations. You're trying to make the most. There's less routine. There's less structure. And then come September, people, kids are going back to school. You need to meal prep a little bit more. So people like doing a Whole30, and we always run a big group one in September, I think, for that reason. But people start the Whole30 every single day of the year. There's no wrong time to start. And very often there's some impetus that gets someone to say, enough. I've had enough. Like, I've read about this. I've been wanting to do it. I'm going to plan prep and I'm going to start on Monday.
Yeah, I think September is really interesting, even if you're not in school anymore. I do think there's that mentality of like fall is the time of going back to school. And then also certainly it's easier to be in the kitchen and doing things in the oven maybe when it's not so hot. And the cooking obviously is a big component of it as well.
It is. I love my slow cooker. So I get back, and I use the slow cooker all year long in fairness, but I get back to more like soups and stews and chilies in fall. I do feel like it's back to school for me too, even though I'm not going to school. It's more, you want to be a little bit more regimented, a little bit more structured. Your days are shorter, so you kind of have to make the most of your days. It just feels a lot less laissez-faire than summer to me.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned your slow cooker. I'm curious about what your cooking habits are like. Obviously, you're super busy. So how much cooking are you doing in the first place? And how does cooking kind of fit into your life?
I still cook quite a bit, although I do lean on, we have Made by Whole30 meal delivery. So I do get 6 to 8 Whole30 meals delivered every single week. And I lean on those in between, between Zoom calls, or if I just need a quick dinner because my husband's out, my kid's at rock climbing, I'll, throw one of those in the microwave or on the stove. I like to keep my meals really simple. The bulk of my diet is still Whole30 because it makes me feel great, and it's very easy for me at this point. But I also eat white rice regularly and corn. I love black beans. I love hummus. These are all foods that work really well for me. So I'm throwing chicken breast and buffalo sauce and like a ranch packet and some ghee in my slow cooker, and I'm doing 2 pounds of buffalo chicken, and I'll serve that maybe in tortillas or maybe in lettuce wraps, maybe with some rice, maybe with sauteed veggies. I kind of do these like big meal preps maybe 2 or 3 times a week where I do protein and a bunch of vegetables, and then I'm sort of mixing and matching it as the week goes on. And then once or twice a week, I'll do an actual recipe, something that's either new or something from my old cookbooks or one of my kids' favorite recipes, and put that together. So it's mix and match.
Yeah, I'm really interested in hearing about the foods that you reintroduced for yourself after going through Whole30. Do you ever do like a total Whole30 reset all over again? Or at this point, do you kind of know what works for you?
Yes. So I haven't done a full Whole30 since April 2020. And I probably won't ever do one again.
I don't have to.
No,
it's okay.
I don't need it. And that's the whole point.
Yeah.
I want you to get to the point where you're like, I don't need a Whole30 protocol anymore because I've eliminated, reintroduced. I know what works for me. I trust myself to make those decisions. And now I just go off and live the rest of my life with my food freedom. So
yeah. And April 2020 was probably a really good time to do that. because there wasn't much going on in the world.
Yes, we didn't. We ran a Whole30 at home in the middle of the pandemic, and people really leaned on the structure, the support, the community. You know, a lot of people say the Whole30 taught them how to cook, and so we were all cooking at home anyway during the pandemic, so it was a good time to do it. But, you know, like I mentioned, all of those foods that I eat now, because I've discovered they work well for me, dairy also works much better for me now than it did when I first did my Whole30. So I do some cheese, I do some Greek yogurt. I still can't do cottage cheese, which is a real bummer because it's having a moment right now.
Yeah, she is having a moment.
I
It's kind of fun
know.
because it's high protein, I guess,
I
and
know.
just fun to eat.
It is fun. I really do miss it, but it doesn't work well for me. But Greek yogurt does. And I can even throw like a little goat cheese or feta in my salad now, and I tolerate it much better.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to have that reminder also that our bodies change over time and that something that doesn't work for you could work for you in the future. It's a nice reminder.
That's such a great point. I always say reintroduction is a lifelong process. There were many years where I would try oatmeal, reintroducing it, and it just didn't work. It left me feeling bloated and kind of like just like sluggish and slow. And then I really started upping my hiking game and running more. And I reintroduced oatmeal again, and all of a sudden my body loved it. And now oatmeal is a staple for me. So your context is always changing, your health is always changing, your goals are always changing, your body is always changing. And that's a big part, I think, of why people do come back to the Whole30 from time to time, is to get that experience again in their current context.
I want to talk a little more about the plant-based Whole30 that you introduced. I don't eat a lot of meat, and I think like when we're talking about the groups you eliminate in Whole30, they're a lot of what I would lean on when I'm making more of a plant-based meal, like dairy or legumes, for example. How did you approach developing that, and are there any foods that you think are really key to the plant-based Whole30?
Yeah, so when we were, of course, you can't do the original Whole30 if you're vegetarian or vegan, because we do rule out most of your plant-based protein sources. So we worked with a registered dietitian specifically on the plant-based Whole30 to ensure that it was nutritionally balanced, that you got enough protein to be healthful every day, and that it was regulating for your blood sugar. So on the plant-based Whole30, your protein is coming from soy, tofu, tempeh, minimally processed forms of soy, and legumes, so beans, peas, and lentils. You're also supplementing with some plant-based protein sources. So like Abbott's Butcher is a really good example of a plant-based protein that they make like crumbles and like a ground beef, but their ingredient list is like very short and minimally processed. And then you'll supplement with some single ingredient plant-based protein powders as well. So that allows you to get enough protein in your diet, but it also allows you to exclude all forms of grains. So you can reintroduce grains and determine which of those, like maybe quinoa, work best for you in life after Whole30.
That's really interesting. I feel like the expansion of the plant-based pantry is something we haven't talked about, but I would imagine that's also like useful. So if you're if you're eating meat and doing Whole30, can you be leaning on those legumes that we're talking about, or is it kind of better to keep it separate?
We do ask that you keep them separate. So with any elimination diet, the more items you eliminate during that first phase, the better learnings you'll have about how foods work in your system. And because soy and legumes can be problematic for some, soy is often allergenic. Legumes typically can produce digestive distress, gas, bloating. Because you're eating plenty of protein from animal sources on the original Whole30, we say leave soy and legumes out and test them during reintroduction. That way you'll get to figure out how and which ones work best for you. On the plant-based Whole30, you have to get your protein from somewhere. And so those minimally processed forms of soy and legumes are really your best option. But we do have tips for incorporating them in a way that could be more digestively friendly if you discover that all of a sudden adding a bunch of legumes to your diet is digestively disruptive.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess it's just about how much data you have to work with at the end.
Exactly, yes.
So I'm catching you on the beginning of this big 3-week-long book tour. I'm curious if there's anything you're excited for, like any cities you're going to for the first time, or at this point, I feel like you've probably covered the country a million times.
I have. I don't think I'm going anywhere for the first time. And I'm going back to a bunch of cities, Toledo, Atlanta, a bunch of cities on the West Coast, Salt Lake City and Austin. I'm always most excited just to hear people's Whole30 stories. I will do a big meet and greet. I'll sign books. I'll answer questions from the the audience at these bookstore events, sometimes people bring me like note cards or letters where they want to share a little bit more of their journey. I have an enormous Lululemon tote bag at home just full of cards and notes that people have left me. And sometimes when I'm having a bad day, I just open them and read them, and they make me so happy. So meeting Whole30 Years is hands down my favorite part of the tour.
Yeah, how does it feel to kind of take a step back and realize the impact of what you've built and what you represent to people?
I don't do that often. And it's not that I'm purposefully preventing myself, but when you're in the middle of it, I'm in the thick of it every day. I'm writing articles, I'm answering DMs, I'm writing a book, I'm doing media. When you're in the middle of it, I think sometimes, and also in my head, sometimes Whole30 is still this scrappy little word of mouth, like this person told this person. And it's kind of hard for me to take a step back and see what the brand has become over the last 15 years. But I was in the grocery store checking out the other day, and I happened to have 3 or 4 Whole30 approved products in my cart at once, a buffalo sauce and a broth and a ghee. And as I'm scanning it, I'm looking at this Whole30 approved logo on the products. And I did have a moment where I thought, like, that this is me on these brands. And it felt really, really good. But then I'm immediately back to like, okay, what else do people need? What can
What's
I write?
next?
What can I help? Yeah, what can I help with?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you have literally changed the grocery store aisle in terms of these products that are being introduced. And to be able to take a step back, whether you're shopping for yourself or you're talking to someone else, is probably a good practice as well.
Yeah, I was at a book tour event not too long ago, I think that for the last tour, and someone in my audience said to me, have you taken a step back yet and just experienced this moment? Like, you wrote this book and now it's out and we are all here to celebrate this book. And I got really teary-eyed. It was a lovely prompt from someone to do just that.
Yeah, I love whoever said that.
I
That's
know.
really special.
It was sweet.
And to close today, I want to play a little rapid fire taste check with you. So I'll give you a question. You can just tell me the first answer that pops into your head.
I love it.
Okay. Your favorite cookbook?
Oh, anything from Danielle Walker. She's a good friend of mine, but she also has written a ton of cookbooks that I love. I think her newest one is called Make It Easy.
Your favorite season for cooking?
Fall, slow cooker.
Yeah, slow cooker. Your favorite recipe in the new Whole30?
Oh, okay. There's a tandoori spiced fish with an apple coconut raita that is hands down like blowing me away.
It sounds really good.
It's so good.
Your favorite Whole30 cookbook?
Probably Whole30 slow cooker. I know I'm a broken record, but I love that one.
No, you know what you like.
I
Love
do.
It. Your favorite music to listen to while cooking?
Audiobook.
Ooh.
Always audiobooks.
A specific genre or all over?
I tend to listen to thrillers, but like I won't read a thriller.
Yeah.
I like listening to it. So I like candy in my ears when I'm listening to an audiobook. I don't want literature. I don't want nonfiction. I want like candy.
You want to be like, what's going to happen
Yes.
next? Your favorite local restaurant?
Ooh, in Salt Lake City? That's tough. I love Takashi has incredible sushi. Lizzie's Kitchen has incredible Mediterranean. And Vessel has a fast casual Whole30 approved menu that's like today.
Something that you will never make from scratch yourself, but you'll buy.
Pizza.
Yeah.
I'm never making pizza.
Especially not the cauliflower crust. It's a lot of
No,
work.
no. I'm not even a pizza person, but my kid likes it, but we're always going to buy it.
Okay, and finally, like a fictional food scene, like in a book or a movie or TV show that you wish you could eat in real life.
Okay, that's so easy. Anything from Yellowstone. When they sit down at the dining room table at Yellowstone and chef brings out all of their food and they never eat it. They always end up getting into a fight at the dinner table and they leave all of that food. And it makes me so sad because I would eat anything on that table.
Someone needs to put you in Yellowstone and
Please.
just clean up after.
Absolutely. I'll be the extra that just sits at the table and stays out of it and minds my business, but enjoys that food.
Well, I'm manifesting that for you. And thank you so much for coming into the studio. It's been so fun.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Eliza, we're here. We're talking about fall cookbooks. How are you doing?
I'm great. I feel like we wait all year to talk about fall cookbooks, so it's finally happening.
It's finally happening, and we're kind of doing a little different this year. We're going to be doing a number of segments based on the categories we find have like prominent publishing this year. And the first one we're going to take on is baking. Eliza, what do you look for in a baking cookbook? I'm curious.
Well, I feel like I look for a couple things. I look for things that sound really delicious off the bat.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people have like a comfort brownie recipe or a family chocolate cake recipe. And if you're going to bring in something new, then it needs to be something that you haven't seen before, whether it's like a technique or a flavor or just a completely different style of baking. I also look for weights and measurements in the cookbook. So I know a lot of people like to use cups and tablespoons, and that totally can exist. But I think having the parenthetical grams alongside it so you can use your scale and make sure it's super accurate is important to me also.
Me too. I love having a gram measurement. It's not always required, but I really do appreciate that. And what I also seek, I agree with you, like having a new twist on old classics is cool. I like learning about cultures through baking, and especially cultures that maybe aren't published as frequently in the baking category, and that leads to my first pick. And we're not really calling these picks. They're not like the best of. We're going to be rolling out several segments throughout the year as we get into like the big cookbook buying season and the release season. But the first one I want to talk about is Desi Bakes. 85 recipes bringing the best of Indian flavors to Western-style desserts. Wow, that is quite a subtitle. By Hetal Vasavada. Now, I have to say, I don't know too much about South Asian baking. And it's kind of an interest of mine, having just returned from India. And I think what Hetal is doing here, and Hetal is from the Milk and Cardamom Instagram account, which is quite popular. It's definitely a book that is framed for the Western audience. So there's a lot of like Western paradigms. There's brownies and there's shakes and things that kind of fall into Western cooking, but all with like more of a South Asian Indian lens. There's a lot of gluten-free, egg-free, and vegan dishes in here. But I really like what I reviewed from the PDF. And we should say that like we haven't seen all of these books. We've tried our best to get the PDFs, but we're recording this in mid-August, and we'll definitely be catching up later with when we start seeing the books in physical form. But I really loved like the strawberry rose faluda, the coconut lime loaf cake. Those are a couple that come like they kind of jump off at me and things that I would definitely make. And I'll just close here and I'll hear your first one. I love Sola's quote, the blurb, there's lots of cool blurbs here. It's perfect for blowing away the PTA at the next bake sale. Love that quote. Really fun.
New mom, Sola, already ready to blow everyone out of the water.
Ready for the PTA meeting.
Yeah.
I love it. So what is your first selection?
Well, I just want to say that in addition to doing these roundups, we're also going to be doing interviews with a lot of authors that are going to be coming to the studio or coming in on Zoom. So there are some great baking books that we're not going to talk about in this roundup because we'll have more time to talk about them, etc. My first pick is called Crumbs by Ben Mims, who used to be a cooking columnist at the LA Times and is someone whose recipes I really admire. And he is kind of doing what you're saying in terms of looking at all kinds of different cultures that have baking, and he is focusing on cookies specifically. So he has hundreds of cookie recipes from all around the world. Because of Cake Scene, we did an issue called Tough Cookie where we were looking at cookies in different global cooking traditions. So I'm already kind of interested in this. He has like an Azerbaijani egg yolk thumbprint cookie. He has beer cookies, which I'd never heard of before. They're called Piryarki, and they're from North Macedonia. And it's like a soft, crumbly cookie that has beer for that kind of malty, yeasty flavor.
Wow.
And a lot more. And he also is talking about the significance behind these cookies in terms of what a shape could symbolize or how ingredients came into this culture and then were showcased in that cookie. And so I think if you're someone who likes baking, it's something you can really kind of geek out on.
I love a fresh cookie book, and Ben is one of the sharpest minds in recipe development. And I loved his work at the LA Times and previously Lucky Peach. Big fan of Ben here. My next selection is Richard Hart Bread. It's by Richard Hart and Lori Wolliver. And, Richard Hart you may have recognized that name from The Bear because his book is featured, I believe, in season 2. The character Marcus has a copy of this book and is really kind of analyzing it and really or at least it's not necessarily his book, but it's his work. So I have to clarify that. It looked like a book, but it's more just like his like online persona. And really, Richard Hart is a real deal. He was born outside London. He worked in the Bay Area, places like Della Fattoria and Petaluma. It's like a really famous Italian-style bakery. And then he worked at Tartine for many years. He was the head baker with Chad Robertson there. And then he was recruited by Rene Redzepi to move to Copenhagen and open Hart Bakery, which has now grown into 8 branches in Denmark. And so the book is beautiful. And credit to Lori Wolliver for collaborating on this and bringing Richard's story to the forefront. I really enjoyed reading through this book and learning about Richard, somebody who I didn't really know much about outside of the bear and maybe some recipes. It's funny, Eliza. The book is really, he's like not into science. He's like right away saying, I'm not like a numbers geeky guy. I just like cook by spirit and bake by spirit. But then you start reading it and you're like, holy shit, this is actually really technical. It's almost like a production book. I would call it intermediate to advanced in terms of what you need to make recipes from this book. And that is absolutely okay. I don't think every book needs to be easy and simple. And really, he's telling you how to scale. He has a lot of baking math in it and has a whole early section about what baking math means. And really, I love this book. There's a lot of QR codes in it. So it shows like videos for technique. And really, if you want to get serious about baking bread, and there's lots of rye breads, there's laminated doughs, there's lots of a variety of baking projects. You're really going to be satisfied. It's definitely like an AP level book again. And I like that point of view from a baking book. And Richard is kind of a mad genius as a personality too. So that really comes out. I enjoyed this book.
I like AP bread as a category.
Totally. What's your next one?
My next one is called Breaking Bao, and it's by Clarice Lamb, whose name you might know from, she's been kind of a career restaurant person here in New York. She worked at Thomas Keller's Bouchon Bakery. She was at Spice Market, and she was the opening pastry chef at Kimika, which is a kind of Japanese-Italian restaurant here in Nolita. And the food there, I think, is really special. And this book is just like a really fun and playful baking book. She has like all kinds of recipes, like a pork floss and scallion focaccia.
That sounds rad.
Which is a riff on a focaccia that they do at Kimika that I really enjoyed. She has a sweet corn custard bao, which I think sweet corn is like the cool dessert flavor here in the U.S., at least this summer. And a lot of other recipes that are kind of showing at how like baking cultures and traditions around the world have intersected. I think if you look at like Japanese patisserie culture, for example, which is like influenced by the French and Italian, and then also like very much Japanese flavors. She has a cool mix of things. And there also are some kind of snack recipes as well, but it's mostly a baking book.
Yes.
So that's my next one.
I love that. Well, my next one and my final one for baking is the King Arthur Big Book of Bread, which I've had a chance to read for about a month. And wow. It is big. It has 125 recipes from the legendary Vermont Flour Company. I'm sure our listeners know about King Arthur. It's a cool company. It's cooperative. It's employee-owned. It has a great story. And we're having some reps from the King Arthur Baking Company coming on the show soon. So we'll talk more about that. But I really like the way they integrate all of their styles of flour into the recipes. And it's not necessarily endorsement to buy the flours, but of course it is. And they do a great job with their flours. And I really like the way naturally leavened breads can be thought of with this scope with 125 recipes. It's for serious bread folks, and really, I think there's a lot of bread books out there, and like, do we need more? It's a big question, but this one's definitely filling a little bit of a gap because it does hit a lot of alt flours. And I love this quote from Claire Saffitz: "It's truly a bread book for every baker." Well, here you go. I feel like there's definitely going to be advanced recipes, some simple focaccia pan breads as well. But I really enjoyed my time with this book.
Yeah, you said naturally leavened. Is it all sourdough, or do they have like instant yeast and things like that as well?
From my reading, there was mostly naturally leavened is the kind of the emphasis here. I think there might be some instant yeast recipes. Like there's definitely some like yeast breads, like some buns and things that might use those instant non-fermented doughs. So I think like it's for all types of bakers. Going back to Claire's quote, it's for every baker.
Yeah, my favorite sandwich bread recipe is a King Arthur classic on their website. So I'm sure that would be in the book alongside some other ones too.
Very much so. There's lots of sandwich bread there. What's your last one?
I'm going to keep it there for now because I'm going to be talking to some bakers on the podcast.
Oh, okay. Well, we're going to have lots of bakers coming on the show. These are just a few of our favorites or ones that we're calling out. But Liza, we'll be back to talk more about baking. There's so many more titles, and it was great catching up.
Yeah, you too. This is Taste is hosted by Matt Rodbard and me, Eliza Abarbanel. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things happening.